What if the actor you now know as one of Hollywood's most recognizable faces had reached his 40s without becoming a star? What if, before the millions, the iconic characters, and the worldwide fame, Samuel L. Jackson was simply a man trying to keep his career alive while the industry kept looking past him? The story becomes even more remarkable when you realize that his biggest breakthrough was still ahead of him. Kindly subscribe for more daily legendary real-life stories. Samuel Leroy Jackson was born on December 21, 1948, in Washington, D.C., but he was raised largely in Chattanooga, Tennessee, by his grandmother. His childhood was shaped by a strict upbringing and by the movies he watched at a local theater. Even at a young age, Jackson became fascinated by the power of actors and the way stories could make audiences feel something. But the Hollywood he would eventually conquer did not yet have a place waiting for him. Jackson attended Morehouse College in Atlanta, where his life began moving in a completely different direction. He became increasingly involved in the civil rights movement and challenged the institution over the absence of black representation on its board of trustees. In 1969, his activism led to his expulsion from the college after he and other students held several trustees inside a building during a protest. It was a turbulent period, but something unexpected was about to happen. That same year, Jackson watched a performance by the Negro Ensemble Company, and for perhaps the first time, acting began to look less like a hobby and more like a future. He returned to Morehouse, completed his studies, and graduated in 1972 with a degree in acting. But having a degree did not mean Hollywood was ready for him. Jackson began working in theater, performing alongside LaTanya Richardson, whom he had met while studying in Atlanta. The two eventually married in 1980, and together they pursued acting while Jackson slowly built his reputation on stage. Then came New York. In the mid-1970s, Jackson and Richardson moved to Harlem, where he began appearing in off-Broadway productions. He was learning the craft the hard way, one performance at a time. There were no massive paychecks and no guarantee that the next opportunity would come. For years, Jackson remained a working actor rather than a famous one. And that distinction matters. Because while audiences would eventually remember him for characters who seemed larger than life, the man behind them spent decades learning how to survive in an industry that often rewards people quickly and forgets them just as quickly. In the early 1980s, Jackson's career began to change through two important relationships. While working on the stage production A Soldier's Play, he met Morgan Freeman, who encouraged him to believe that he could succeed as an actor. Around the same period, he met a young filmmaker named Spike Lee. Lee saw something in Jackson. That connection led to appearances in films including School Days, Do the Right Thing, and Mo Better Blues. Suddenly, Jackson was no longer invisible. He was becoming a familiar face, especially to filmmakers who recognized that he could bring intensity, humor, anger, and vulnerability into the same performance. But just as his career was beginning to move forward, his personal life was becoming increasingly difficult. Jackson struggled with addiction, and the problem threatened to consume the career he had spent years building. The actor who had waited decades for his opportunity was now in danger of losing it before the world had even discovered what he could really do. Then Spike Lee gave him a role that would force him to confront the darkest part of his life. Jackson was cast as Gator Purify in Jungle Fever, a character battling drug addiction. The performance was so powerful that it changed the way Hollywood viewed him. At the Cannes Film Festival, the jury created a Best Supporting Actor award specifically for Jackson's performance. But the greatest victory was not the award. It was what happened afterward. The role helped Jackson confront his own addiction, and he entered recovery. For the first time, his professional struggle and personal struggle were colliding in a way that could either destroy him or transform him. And Jackson was not finished. He had spent decades waiting for Hollywood to notice him. Now, after everything he had survived, the role that would finally turn Samuel L. Jackson into a household name was approaching. And it was about to change everything. For Samuel L. Jackson, getting sober was not the end of the struggle. In many ways, it was the beginning of the most important chapter of his career. He had finally confronted the personal battle that had threatened to destroy everything he had worked for. But Hollywood had another question for him. Could a man who had spent decades playing supporting roles suddenly become a leading star? The answer was about to come from an unexpected place. In 1994, director Quentin Tarantino was preparing a movie that looked almost impossible to predict. It had an unusual structure, strange characters, dark humor, and conversations that could turn ordinary situations into unforgettable moments. The movie was Pulp Fiction, and Tarantino wanted Samuel L. Jackson. Jackson auditioned for the role of Jules Winnfield, a hitman whose calm confidence and intimidating presence would eventually become one of the most recognizable performances in modern cinema. But when Jackson arrived for the audition, there was another actor being considered for the same part. Jackson reportedly left the room believing he might have lost the opportunity. Then Tarantino called him back. This time, Jackson gave the performance that changed his life. When Pulp Fiction premiered at the Cannes Film Festival in 1994, nobody knew exactly what Hollywood was about to witness. The film became a cultural phenomenon, and Jackson's performance stood at the center of it. Suddenly, the actor who had spent years waiting for his moment was everywhere. He received an Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actor, and his career moved into an entirely different category. At 45 years old, Samuel L. Jackson had become a major Hollywood star. But what made his rise so unusual was not simply the success. It was the timing. Most actors are introduced to audiences when they are young. Jackson's breakthrough came after decades of rejection, theater work, personal struggles, and small film roles. He had not arrived early. He had arrived prepared. And Hollywood quickly discovered that Jackson could do much more than play one unforgettable character. He appeared in Die Hard with a Vengeance, A Time to Kill, The Negotiator, and Jackie Brown, proving that the intensity people had seen in Pulp Fiction was not a one-time performance. Then came another transformation. In 1999, Jackson joined the Star Wars universe as Jedi Master Mace Windu. For an actor who had once struggled to get major opportunities, becoming part of one of the biggest franchises in entertainment history was almost unbelievable. But Jackson had developed something even more valuable than fame. He had developed control. He understood his screen presence. He knew how to enter a scene and immediately command attention. Sometimes he barely had to raise his voice. A look, a pause, or a change in his delivery could completely shift the atmosphere. That became the Samuel L. Jackson effect. And Hollywood began giving him roles that depended on exactly that quality. But there was something else happening behind the scenes. Jackson had spent years building a career in an industry where black actors were often given limited opportunities. Instead of allowing those limitations to define him, he kept expanding his range. He could play a villain, a detective, a mentor, a soldier, politician, criminal, a hero. And sometimes he could play all of those qualities in the same character. His success also changed the expectations surrounding him. Jackson was no longer simply the actor audiences recognized. He became the actor producers knew could bring energy and credibility to a movie. Then came Marvel. Jackson appeared as Nick Fury, beginning with a post-credit scene in Iron Man in 2008. At the time, it was only a brief appearance. But that brief scene was the beginning of another enormous chapter. Jackson would eventually become one of the central faces connecting the Marvel Cinematic Universe, appearing across multiple films and helping establish Nick Fury as a major character. By then, the man who had once struggled to find consistent work had become one of the most prolific actors in Hollywood. But success did not erase the years that came before it. If anything, his career made those years more meaningful. Samuel L. Jackson had not simply become famous. He had survived long enough to become undeniable. And after everything he had overcome, there was still one question left. What had he learned from spending so many years waiting for Hollywood to finally say yes? By the time Samuel L. Jackson became one of Hollywood's most recognizable actors, the story could have ended there. The struggling performer had become a star. The man who spent decades waiting for his opportunity had finally received more opportunities than he could count. But Jackson's greatest achievement was not simply becoming famous. It was proving that a career does not have to follow Hollywood's timeline. After Pulp Fiction, Jackson entered a period of extraordinary productivity. He continued taking on major roles while refusing to be trapped inside one image. He could move from action movies to dramas, from serious characters to humor, and from independent films to enormous franchises. His presence became so recognizable that audiences could often sense what kind of energy he would bring before he even spoke. But there was a reason for that confidence. Jackson had already lived through the years when nobody was watching. He knew what it felt like to perform without fame, to work without recognition, and to keep pursuing a dream while the world remained unconvinced. That experience gave him something many successful actors never develop: patience. And patience became one of the defining qualities of his career. His role as Nick Fury introduced him to a new generation of viewers. What began as a brief appearance in Iron Man eventually became part of a much larger story. Jackson returned as Fury in several Marvel films, helping connect different characters and different chapters of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. The transformation was remarkable. The actor who once struggled to find substantial film roles was now appearing in some of the biggest movies in the world. Yet Jackson never seemed interested in pretending that success had erased his past. He spoke openly about the difficult period of his life and the importance of recovery. His story became bigger than acting because it showed what could happen when a person refuses to let the worst period of their life become the final definition of who they are. That is what makes his journey different from a simple Hollywood success story. Samuel L. Jackson did not rise because everything went right. He rose after many things went wrong. He had been expelled from college during a turbulent period of activism. He spent years working in theater before mainstream audiences knew his name. He struggled with addiction. He reached his breakthrough much later than many actors. And still, he kept going. Even after becoming a major star, Jackson continued working at an extraordinary pace. His filmography expanded across genres and generations, making him one of the most familiar faces in modern cinema. But perhaps the most important part of his legacy is what his career says about time. Hollywood often creates the impression that success has an expiration date. Young performers are pushed into the spotlight, and older performers can be treated as though their opportunity has already passed. Jackson's career challenged that idea. He was 45 when Pulp Fiction transformed him into a major star. At an age when many people might have decided that their biggest opportunity had already passed, Jackson was only beginning the chapter that would define his worldwide legacy. And that timing made his success even more powerful. Because he did not become Samuel L. Jackson overnight. The world simply discovered him after he had already spent decades becoming the actor he needed to be. There is also a lesson in the way he handled fame. Jackson did not abandon the qualities that made him distinctive when success arrived. His voice, intensity, confidence, humor, and unmistakable screen presence became part of his identity. Instead of trying to become someone else, he leaned further into what made him different. That decision helped turn an actor into an icon. Today, his career stretches across generations. Older audiences remember the performer who fought for recognition. Younger audiences know him as Nick Fury and as the unforgettable presence from films that became cultural landmarks. But behind all of those characters is the same man who once had to wait for Hollywood to notice him. And perhaps that is the real meaning of Samuel L. Jackson's story. The breakthrough was never the whole story. The real story was everything that happened before it. The years of preparation, the setbacks, the personal battle, the recovery, the rejection, the persistence, and finally, the moment when the right opportunity met an actor who had spent decades preparing for it. Samuel L. Jackson did not become successful because he was discovered early. He became successful because he refused to believe that being overlooked meant being finished. His life is a reminder that sometimes the chapter that looks like the end is only the part of the story where you are being prepared for what comes next. And for Samuel L. Jackson, the world may have discovered him at 45. But he had been preparing for that moment his entire life. This is the story behind the name of Samuel L. Jackson.